All right, hi everyone. People here, as well as those who will hopefully be watching this recording later. This is our panel discussion on sort of intro to tabbing, tabbing for beginners, all sorts of things. I've got a very wonderful, experienced, qualified panel with us today. Very, very lucky to have them here. I'm just going to do a whip around and ask them to just introduce themselves. And first, tell us a bit about their tabbing experience. I'll start with you, Kelsey, if that's okay. I might go Kelsey, Marthe, Peter, Alice. Just say, cool.
Amazing. Hey, I'm Kelsey. I am from Australia. I got into tabbing, so I am actually very bad with technology and everything to do with anything. I'm like a little old lady. I have my knitting next to me. So I sort of fell into tabbing since the state I'm from, Queensland. We have 2 institutions, and that's like our whole state. So we had no one doing tabbing. And there was one person who taught me how to log into TabbyCat, and then I did like the demo and just figured it out and did all the Queensland comps. Thankfully, Queensland suffered through my endless delay of trying to figure it out. But I sort of fell into it, liked it, sort of could figure out how to handle technology with it. I'm inept in everything else with technology. But yeah, and then talked to Varan in a like the Australian like god tabbing at a couple of different things, and he was like, hey, come do this major. And yeah, I fell into it that way.
A lot from there. Thanks, Kelsey.
Yeah.
Marthe?
Yeah, okay, so for me, it's a bit of a different story. I wanted to do something outside of my comfort zone, and then I decided to join the debating circuit. And then people were like, oh, let's organize a tournament. And then we kind of forgot to get a tab master on board. So then the convener was like, oh, you can do it. I was like, I don't know. I've never been to a debating tournament before. And then I just tabbed the tournament, and it actually went really well. And since then, I just never stopped, I guess. I randomly signed up for Scottish Euros, then still Scottish Euros. It happened to be Novi Sad in the end. And that was great. And like I've tabbed most tournaments in the Netherlands by now. Oh yeah, I'm from the Netherlands. Forgot to say that. And online, I was involved with Berlin IV, and after that, I just kept tabbing online tournaments. Yeah, so that's me.
Awesome, thank you. Peter?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, awesome, cool. Hi, I'm Peter, also from Australia. I got into tabbing because I am a maths student. There's not many of us, but I remember at my first ever comp, someone explained to me like what tabbing was, and I was like, yep, that's where I want to be. Away from all of the people who are good with words, I want to go back to the numbers. Yeah, so I sort of got into it that way. I asked Varan and a couple of other tabbers in Australia to sort of like shadow them for a few tournaments and got into it that way, I guess. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And lastly, Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm from Ireland, and I kind of fell into tabbing as well. I was in my first year and we had a pro-am competition in my institution, and they were like, well, does anyone want to learn how to tab? And it was with Val Tierney, and I was like, oh yeah, go on, why not? And kind of it went off from there. And then I kind of found there was like nearly a year where I was the only person in the Irish circuit who was tabbing. So it soon became like all encompassing in that it was like I was tabbing every comp in the country. And then I think when COVID hit, I was like, it's time for a break. You've done 20 something of these. You need a bit of time off. And so I haven't really done much online comps, but I think seeing how much it's developed in that time has been quite fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that introduction from all of you. That's really interesting to hear. You've all come at it from different kind of entry points and so on. I might just stick with the same order initially and then kind of mix it up as we get into discussion. You've kind of already touched on what got you into tabbing, not just kind of the experiences that you've had. But I just want to know, I mean, maybe this is too vague a question, but like, what about it do you enjoy, and like have you had largely positive experiences with it? Because I think a lot of people would view tabbing, particularly in the online era, as perhaps being a little bit, you don't necessarily have as much interactivity with participants as maybe an Adcock was. There's not always as big a team as an Adcock. So some people might see it as a bit of a, not isolating, but, perhaps not as socially interactive activity. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of admin involved with it. So I'm just, curious to know what sort of has kept, maybe not what drew you to it initially, but what's kind of kept you tabbing, and have your experiences been largely positive? And, feel free to be completely honest if that's not been always the case. So Kelsey?
Yeah, so tabbing for me has always been like an interesting one, because I'm not the typical like tabbing. I'm being one of those debaters who are like, I'm quitting every single time, every single year. I think I've said it to Jess like 50 billion times this year alone. But I think tabbing is a lot of fun. You get to meet cool people. The benefit of the online one was like doing things such as Doxbridge and just meeting all these people on the other side of the world and being like, I'm just running a tab with you on this international major, which when you say it like that sounds really, really cool. And you're like, this is actually like a big deal. I'm doing all of these things that you don't really get the opportunity to. I think my first major was like AWDC, so Australasian like women's debating. And that was a lot of fun, since I think a lot of females in the circuit, I'm guessing since we're all like female tabbers, no one really knows what to do. They sort of take it as like it's a men's thing. They know how to tab. And as a female, you're like sort of on the outs going, this is a bit uncomfortable. I don't know whether I should be like speaking up or getting involved. So doing that comp was really beneficial, and I really enjoyed it, just having all the women and the amount of them who came up to me just to ask about tabbing. And I think because they were just comfortable to be like, here's some just like random questions, because I think programs such as this sort of help you to understand it. But like Jess was saying, no one knows what tabbing does. They just think it's like locked in a room and you're just like clicking on a keyboard. And it's mainly that. But there's a lot more to it in like the socializing, the aspect of being in that group and hanging out, and you learn a lot more about the back end of debating. And instead of being like, yeah, the tab like screwed me over with this draw, you're like, actually, like, no, we don't purposely go out and pick the teams and all of that stuff to match. And just pulling back that veil has been very, very interesting. It's kept me in it, because I think every comp is also different. You get to hang out with different people and see the style, and obviously there's new different like tabbing things coming ahead, so it's fun to see how it's evolving, especially with online debating and how streamlined it is now. That was a long-winded rant of going, it feels pretty fun just to do it. Honestly, it's a good job to have. Yeah,
that's a good answer. And it occurs to me as I ask you that question that in terms of why have you stuck around a while, it's probably because Jess keeps asking me to tab things. It's probably like a part of the answer. But anyway, awesome. What about you, Marthe?
Yeah, so for me it was like, I started tabbing with Tournament, which is this like, I don't know, it's this tabbing software that is very basic, but it gives you a really good insight into how tabbing works. And then at some point I upgraded to Tabby 2, and very soon after I upgraded to TabbyCat, mostly because I kept running into bugs with Tabby 2, which is a bit sad. Kind of almost screwed up a tournament because of it. Halfway actually changed to TabbyCat. So it's, for me, I guess that's also the example that explains to you why I still like it and why I still enjoy it, is because even though it seems to be the same thing over and over again, but actually you keep running into some problems and then having to think on your feet real quick and figure out a way to actually make sure that the tab will still work and that your tournament more or less still runs on time. Especially when running into problems, that's something I really enjoy doing. So it's not just a strict just entering numbers, etc., but a lot more just trying to figure out how to still run your tournament. With the online tournaments, it's a bit different, but but it's also like you have to keep figuring out how to improve how to improve the tabbing on itself. And that's really helped with lots of people developing scripts or bots. I guess we'll go into that a bit more. But what I also really like about it is just, I mean, the very first tournament I actually worked with Emma Lucas and Sarah Nevo, two really good debaters. But you don't really look up to them because you work together with them. So you get a really good social life out of it, I guess. Yeah, that's more or less my answer.
No, that's, I think, very useful. And I think what it implies as well is that there's a lot of pride that comes from tabbing and tabbing well. And if you're able to deliver a good experience for people, there's probably something really awesome about that. What about you, Peter?
So I think like you sort of hit the nail on the head there, Justin, that there is a lot of like that pride. I found that, I mean, I'm sure we can probably all attest to the fact that sometimes debating can be really emotionally draining. You can do really well at debating and still not do, like, there's no sort of definitive line of like, this is where I've done well, this is where I haven't. There's always going to be those sort of ups and downs. With tabbing, while there's certainly a part of that, you're building something, like you're creating something the entire time. And in that sense, you're making something that either works or it doesn't work. And like, it usually works, at least to some degree. And so there is a success factor at the end where it's like, I've done something that's really good. Look at this thing I built. I'm like really proud of it. Which I found that was more sustainable than debating personally. So like it's moving away from that competitive nature and instead into something that you can just like really work on and be proud of. I guess that's what's kept me in tabbing.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely understand that. That's awesome. And last but not least, Alice, what about you?
Well, I kind of fell into it very much so in that like I shadowed for 2 competitions and then kind of found that within 18 months there's maybe 2 or 3 competitions in the country that I didn't get asked to tab, and I was like, I've got to like stick with this. And I definitely like at the start very much enjoyed it. It was quite satisfying, and like you have that creative aspect, as Peter was saying, where like you're building this thing and you're making sure that this competition can actually happen, and it's quite rewarding. But I do think there is like a level at which when you kind of, and this is more applicable, like I'd say in pre-COVID times, where like there comes a point where you kind of have no real control of like what weekends are going to be free, and you kind of like do reach a point of burnout eventually. But what I found since taking a break is that I miss it quite a lot. I do think I miss the in-person more than online, to be fair, but it's really enjoyable to get to see everyone experience how much they enjoy the debating competitions through what we do, and that if we weren't there doing it, they wouldn't have that same experience. And especially when you run a competition to time, and like even if there have been issues with getting that competition to go to time, if you and the CA panel are the only people who know that those issues have happened, it is so satisfying to just hear someone say, oh, it went so smoothly. And you're like, in your head, you're like, it didn't. But the fact that you think it did means I have succeeded at this task. So this is quite fantastic that like I've managed to problem solve to the level at which I know there was something severely wrong during this competition, but you had no clue. So that's perfect. And yeah, I definitely think overall it is quite enjoyable. And if you're someone who still wants to be involved in debating and you don't particularly like speaking or judging for whatever reason, it's a great way to stay involved and learn a pretty useful skill.
Awesome. No, thank you for that. And I think what I kind of take away from what you've said and what everyone has said is that it can be a very rewarding task, but it is can also be a little bit thankless at times. And you know, and yeah, it's really great when you do pull off. I mean, certainly my experience being on Adcock is that, yeah, there's so many times where the tab team just saves our asses and people don't really see that a lot. So I think, yeah, similar to equity, I think it's sometimes one of those tasks that gets sort of under-recognized. And I think it's just so important that thanks are sort of given where it's definitely due. So I might, for this next question, I might go in reverse order if that's okay. And I guess just add as much as you can, and then I guess others can kind of fill in the blanks as we go along. I'm conscious that tabbing's not super straightforward these days, given that there's so many different systems. I can't keep up myself with the different kind of, you know, Tabtastic, Tabby, there's bots. Like, I guess as a tech illiterate person, it's a lot for one to take in. But nonetheless, I'm sure there are still some basic core processes that apply regardless of what sort of system or configuration one is using. So I was just hoping you guys could talk through, I guess, just some of like the really basic steps that you should consider when you're tabbing a tournament. Just, you know, even if it's as rudimentary as you need to get the data from the OrCom and kind of those things. So are there some key things that you, I guess, as a bit of a checklist even, or however you think it's most logical to explain it, you think new tabbers should consider when they are tabbing? So I might start with you, Alice, if that's okay. And I hope that makes sense as a question.
Yeah. I think if you're starting out, definitely run a couple of test tournaments. If you're going to be using TabbyCat, like, you can load a generic tournament and it will let you kind of like work through all of the steps of doing a competition without having to like put in an actual competition. And that's quite important, just so you get a feel of the software and you're not kind of looking at it as this daunting thing, and kind of troubleshoot things that you're not sure how to do. In terms of before, like, you're running a competition, definitely if you're the one in charge of pre-reg, because I know it works differently for a lot of tab masters, like whether it's the OrCom or the tab master who gets in the pre-reg information first. Have a strict deadline on your pre-reg. It will just make your life easier. Give a little bit of leeway, but if the amount of leeway is kind of getting a bit ridiculous and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning for you and people are still messaging you going, I'm pre-regging late, just be like, please do not message me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I also need to sleep. And also definitely another thing, which like I don't think people think about as much, is that like when you give information very last minute to someone who's doing the tab, people have different kind of timelines of when they'll input the information. So some people wait until they have all the information, other people do it as they go along. And if someone's waiting for all the information, it's quite frustrating to be kind of there for ages, waiting for like 1 or 2 people left to respond at all if they're coming or anything. And so you could be there at like 2 in the morning going, now I can finally input all the data, but it's the night before the competition. I really don't appreciate having to do this. But nevertheless, I think other things are just like, be confident in yourself is quite important. Even if you're new to it and like you're not sure, have the confidence to like say, I need help with this, reach out. There's loads of people on the circuit who tab and who know the system and the software. And even if you don't know them particularly well or at all, and you've only kind of seen them post, most people are pretty willing to help you out. And yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to think of this and I'm kind of running out of what to say. So I'm gonna hopefully let the next person go.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. That gives a great starting point. And I think that's some very useful advice. And I think the others can certainly add to that as we go along. So Peter, I think that's the order we were going in reverse. So is there anything you'd add to that, or is there anything you'd do differently or along those lines?
Yeah, I have a literal checklist as well that over the course of many tournaments has been made. I guess the biggest thing is that no matter how prepared you are, something will go wrong. You will always forget something, whether it's something like forgetting to like print ballots or forgetting to turn off share screen before you put the topics up. Like something's going to go wrong, and that's okay. Pretty much everyone who is a debater, who is at any sort of tournament, has experienced that already. It's not the end of the world. But it just, I mean, it takes practice to try and keep all of those, or like to sort of like decrease the number of those mistakes as you go on. Like Alice said, there's a lot of resources out there for this sort of thing. I know that there's a Facebook group specifically for tabby cat related problems. I know that I think most of us here are happy to have people reach out to them, especially in our own area when they're looking for some more like guidance in terms of getting started on tabby. It depends on what system you use, but mostly the interface is really good and pretty self-explanatory. Alice mentioned the early deadlines, which are great. Allcom generally tends to have a little bit more control over these sort of things than we would at TAB. But from my experience, Allcom are usually more than willing to do anything they can to help out TAB people. So not being afraid to utilize those resources is really good too. I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Peter. That's great. And what about you, Marthe? Again, is there sort of anything else you would add or anything you'd do a bit differently from your end?
No, I mostly agree. What I do think is very important that make sure you contact your CA team on time so you know what they're going to do, what they expect from you, but also that they know what you expect from them. So make sure, for example, that you have the judge ratings on time. Otherwise, you have to input them last minute, which is really annoying. But also kind of know how, make sure that you know the process you're going through. Make sure that you know that you have a checklist for yourself or like an idea in your head how you're going to proceed with each round. But also make sure that the organization knows what to do. Usually it's their like first time organizing a tournament, sometimes it's their second time. But at some point, if you're doing multiple tournaments, you're the one with the most experience. Maybe there's some CAs with more experience with tournaments than you, but the organization itself probably has less experience than you. So make sure that the organization also feels confident enough to run the tournament. Usually, when I'm at a tournament, at least with offline tournaments, I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this right now. And I just stay really calm so people know that I know what I'm doing, so they completely trust that whatever's gonna happen with the tab, it's gonna be all right. I think that's really important. And also, yeah, just be willing to ask, and also don't forget to speak up to your CAs or your organization if they don't do what you want them to do. And one other thing that I usually tell people, it's kind of a mean thing to say, but just assume that debaters are stupid. I mean, they're definitely not. They're great people and they're really smart and intelligent people, but they will fuck up some way, probably at some point. So just keep it into account and make it as clear as possible for everyone what they need to do. Yeah, that's more or less it. What I would not want to add.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really great. And last but not least, Kelsey.
Yeah, all I'd add to it is sort of adding what everyone else was saying, that having a clear communication between like the ADCOR, the organizing committee, and the TAB team is really like beneficial, that everyone's on the same page, since tabbing isn't like some big hidden secret. They don't really understand it. So they don't know what, as ADCOR and Orgcom, don't know how to help you. So like Marthe was saying, it's very like telling them what you need. And it might just be, don't like yell judge allocations at me while I'm trying to fix the tab sort of thing. Just like telling them what you're doing is always beneficial. Also, yeah, debaters, making sure they fill in forms. They hate for some reason filling in forms, or they'll miss data. And every time you message them, they will 100% think you're in the wrong. So you'll message them and be like, hey, you didn't fill in like your email. Or they'll message you going, oh, I didn't get my private URL. And I'll be like, yeah, you didn't give me your email. And they'll always argue and just be like, I definitely did. And I'll be like, I'm staring at the form. You didn't. So you just need to have the confidence to go through and check the forms and then be able to reach out to them and have that confidence to be like, no, I'm in charge of this. Like, you were given instructions to fill in the form. Like, it shouldn't be difficult. And just making sure you get that confidence, which is sort of trial and error. I know in my first few comps, I was a lot more nervous than that. And then I sort of became a bit more cynical and was like, no, fill in this form. But yeah, other than that, communication, since everyone thinks tabbing is a lot harder than it is, it's easier to like explain your process so people can support you in that way.
Awesome, thanks for that. And sorry to turn off my video in between. I'm trying to eat and do this multitask. I think that's a really good overview of some of the the key things. So thank you everyone very much for that. I'm wondering, I think some of you have already actually touched on it, but I guess more just if there's anything else you want to add in this area. Wait, where am I up to? How do you think people can grow their experience? I know that's like a very broad question, and you've kind of already spoken about, again, the kind of more step-by-step kind of things that people might do. Do you think it's just a case of tabbing more things, tabbing things in different circuits, tabbing different size competitions? Is it as basic as that, or is there more to it, working with different tab teams and so on? What in your mind is probably the most kind of key thing in order to actually become a better tabber? I might, if that's okay, start with Marthe, and then Alice, and then Kelsey, and then Peter, if that's okay. And if you can't add too much to the previous question, that's totally fine, because I think it's somewhat of a similar question, but this is more, I guess, about building your own kind of competency.
I find it a bit difficult to answer this question. For me, it's like at some point you understand the software more and more. So at the start, you just keep a guide with you all the time and keep it as a reference. At some point, just try to let it loose and don't use it anymore, or less so. If you're tabbing tournaments, at the start, just say yes to everything, and at some point you get used to it more. Don't start with a tournament of like 60 teams, because that might be a bit overwhelming. Just start with smaller tournaments of like 30 teams or something, and you'll get used to it. If you do want to tab larger comps and you feel still a bit you feel you're still a bit inexperienced, reach out to someone and say like, hey, I have tabbed some smaller comps now. Would you mind walking me through how to approach a larger comp? Or ask someone else who's also still a little bit inexperienced, and say like, hey, do you want to tab this comp together instead? For me, that's kind of, it's kind of grown on me just by doing a lot of comps. And then at some point they're just really big. That's kind of my answer.
No, that's okay. Sometimes it's not a hugely complex formula. It is really just doing that. But I just wanted to kind of confirm that. But Alice, do you have a similar view, or how do you think one can grow one's skills?
For me, it was just practice. So I viewed each competition I did in the beginning as like an opportunity to practice. So doing the first 3 with someone else made it a lot easier. And then in my own university, I asked, could I tab internal competitions? We do like maidens and stuff. And at the time, friends of mine were running it, and it made it a lot easier to just have to get to experience different forms of tabbing. So I got to use both spreadsheets and TabbyCat, and during that time as well, I kind of learned a bit of how to use Tournament, and I just kind of spent a bit of time working through it and kind of going, okay, this is what I understand, this is what I don't understand, how do I find the answers to what I don't understand so that I get it? And then just kind of, it became almost intuitive in a way at that point, because you're repeating the same process again and again, and you kind of are like, oh, I had this problem before, but now I know how to fix it. And I think if you're like, find that you don't have enough experience yourself or something, don't be afraid to like reach out to institutions or even other people in tabbing, being like, could I shadow you, or you already have a tab master, would you mind if putting me in contact with them, and if I could help them with the competition. I've definitely found that like working with more experienced people in the beginning definitely helped me be a lot more confident in tabbing, and definitely like having opportunities to talk to other people who tab, especially in my circuit where there's like, in Ireland there's very few of us. When you get kind of like meet one of them, get to talk, it's really refreshing to know that like you're not the only person who's experienced various problems at a competition, and it's kind of like, yes, someone else gets it. So definitely, like, if you want to work with someone, look into working with them. They'll most likely say yes.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. That's really helpful. Who did I have next? It was Kelsey, I think.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much onto this. I think my approach to learning tabbing was a lot different. I did a lot of Queensland minis, which are very small. And I went the whole fake it till you make it sort of approach. So the tab would stuff up and I would just send them into the debate and then spend the whole time the debate was happening trying to fix the tab. So I think with this like learning, do all the minis and then go into majors, like everyone was saying, it is just like a practice thing. But yeah, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Like everything on Tabby can be fixed if it means like getting the outside help or doing a quick Google on like something to try and figure it out is always beneficial. But I think, yeah, everyone else pretty much covered it.
Okay, excellent. I think that's really good. And Peter, was there anything else you would add yourself?
Sort of just like what Alice said, it's just a lot easier to tab as part of a team than it is to tab alone. There are very, very few cases, I think, where a person who is tabbing a tournament would not say yes to the opportunity to have someone additional on the team or shadow them. So if you ask someone if you can help them out with a comp, they're very likely to say yes. And also, like, we know how few people there can be in tabbing sometimes, and we want more competent people so we can have a few weekends off every now and then. I was lucky enough to be in an area where there sort of were a lot of other people around who knew TabbyCat, who could sort of give me a lot of guidance in the beginning. Unlike Kelsey, I sort of like wasn't thrown into it in the dark too much. But in a way, like having that at the beginning was super helpful, but it can also be really helpful to sort of make sure that you're going into a tournament with a little bit more control, sort of pushing yourself into the deep end every now and then. So if I was constantly under somebody who I saw as like far more knowledgeable in Tabby, I was always feeling like I could only ever succeed with tabs when they were there to help fix every sort of problem that arose. But a lot of the learning just comes from having to solve those problems sometimes on your own. So don't be afraid to, like, once you feel a little bit more comfortable, step out and try a proper tournament, either on your own or with someone less experienced.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think that's altogether a pretty holistic set of tips about what to do from a practical perspective, but how to grow your experience. So thank you very much, everyone. I actually only have one final question, and then perhaps if there's anything else you want to add, feel free. Otherwise, we can ask anyone in the audience if they've got any questions. It's basically about improving tabbing, basically. There are a number of things in my mind that, and so I'll say, I think for this one, we'll go back to the original order. So I might ask Kelsey, Marthe, then Peter, then Alice, just so you know what order. yeah, in my mind, there seems like there's probably, without knowing much about the specifics of tabbing, probably things that could be improved. Do you think it's largely a question of functionality? Are there like, for example, is there like a dream list of something that, if the development was there, is there like some wish list you'd have, like, I wish tab systems could do this? Or do you think kind of not the problems, but do you think kind of the room for improvement in terms of avoiding, issues that come up at tournaments sometimes is more a human kind of error question? And is there then anything you'd like to see different there? Is it something that you think all comms could do better? Are there things that you wish CAs would do differently or better? So I'll start with Kelsey.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk largely on like the software of tabbing, because as I flagged, I know nothing about it. I just like click buttons and hope for the best. So I'll leave that to the others. But yeah, what I would say is into the future, I think starting out in actual being a debater and an adjudicator, I know a lot of times if like rounds were running late or anything, everyone would just blame tab and they'd be like, obviously the tab stuffed up. And then you go into the behind the scenes and realize tab is taking the flak for everybody, because most likely tab is done and they're just sitting there watching the CAs or watching the all-com, being like, hurry up, like, come on, get the draw out. So I think going into the future, a big thing would be doing programs such as this, getting just knowledge about tabbing and what actually tabbing does out there is a big part. Doing workshops or having things to teach other tabbies, since I know, like all the stories for everyone, all the tabbers here today, we had to reach out to somebody to learn how to tab. It's not something that, like debating or adjudicating, you have workshops at the start of comps to tell you how to do it, because it's never been a thing. Everyone thinks it's this high and mighty sort of thing. You have to be into like tech or be studying like Peter maths to get into it. So I think just normalizing tabbing and like knowledge surrounding it is a big thing. And realizing you shouldn't blame tab for everything. If it's running like an hour late, please don't yell at the tabbers. Or if like something's gone wrong in your draw, or you're just angry that you keep on getting like really hard teams in BP, like it's not our fault. Please don't send us angry messages. So yeah, just getting the knowledge out there is, I think, the biggest thing. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I think that's a very good tip. What about you, Marthe? What from your perspective?
So, I mean, there's several softwares out there. I know there's currently a team trying to improve Tabby 2 into Tabby 3, which I'm very excited about. I hope it's going to be great, but who knows. But TabbyCat on itself, it has a lot of functions, and usually it's pretty straightforward, and sometimes it's a bit confusing, but most of it is pretty straightforward. What I still miss there is an importer that doesn't want you to do everything manually. That's one of the few things that are not as good about TabbyCat, because both Tabby 2 and Tournament, the other two softwares that I've used before, do have an automatic importer, though TabbyCat does allow you to write your own, but I don't know shit about coding, so that's not going to work. And since TabbyCat has an API, I don't know what it stands for, but it's really useful. There's actually been some bots that have been written, and so we can now link TabbyCat to Discord and probably also Zoom, which is great and really, really improved tabbing for me for online tournaments, especially Tabtastic. I'm really fan of that one, but I also know there's TabbyBot and RyanBot out there that are also really useful, but I haven't used them myself yet. So if you're tabbing a tournament and you're willing to use one of them, I guess you should just reach out to one of the developers. I think I know how to get in contact with them. So if you have trouble finding them, just send me a message.
Yeah,
I think that's it for me.
No, that's great. And I think, again, it's like another good thought, which is like a lot of the developers, they want to share their creation and their babies. They're excited about their little projects. So they probably will definitely be willing to have a chat to you if you have questions and all of that. Yeah, awesome. That's really good. Peter, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that could be improved. Not all of them we have control over. There are things that could be improved about the way people other than tabbing than the tab team have control over, like people filling out forms and things like that. Most of that we sort of can't really do anything about, but if you want to do one thing to make tab's life a whole lot easier, it's just to give us all the information we need as early as possible. But in general, for the actual tabbing software itself, the good thing about it is that it's constantly being developed. Like people in debating just seem to have way too much time, like spare time on their hands, and they're constantly making all of these little changes. Like look at how quickly after COVID started, there were so many like add-ons. I don't have a great deal of experience with them all, but like Tabtastic that were developed quickly to be able to handle online tournaments. So most of the time when there's something really that is difficult to work with in the interface, it can get resolved quite quickly. Or you can get in contact with one of the developers, like was said earlier, to try and get that resolved. So I don't have any major complaints about the way the software works at the moment.
Yeah, okay, awesome. And yeah, I would agree, just all comms have to give tab information, not the night before the tournament, ideally, preferably a lot earlier than that as well. Awesome. And again, last but not least, Alice, what are your thoughts on this?
So I think in the Irish circuit, it's worked a bit differently in terms of like who's in charge of pre-reg. So usually pre-reg would be up to me and not the org com. So I'd be waiting on everyone to get the information directly to me, and then I'd spread it to org com and everything. So in that case, like to make just functionality a bit easier and just kind of like the pre-competition part, it would definitely be like, if it's a situation like that, please, for the love of God, obey the deadline. I cannot stress how much easier it makes competitions go for OrgCom, CAs, TAB, everyone involved. If you can just get your information into us, it makes it so much easier, and it means we're a lot more relaxed going into a competition. And then in terms of the software, much like Marthe was saying, my only kind of major complaint with Tabby Cat at the moment is just the importing system. Is that like I also couldn't write a line of code to save my life. I tried learning, it was an epic disaster. But I think if there was anything major that could be improved in it, it would definitely just be the importing system. It is quite painstaking at times to go through every individual bit of information, copy paste from spreadsheets, and then other than that, I think it would just be people being a bit more aware and patient in competitions, that like if there is, and this has been touched on before, if there is like a timing issue, it is not guaranteed that because there is a delay that it has anything to do with the tab. There are a variety of factors that could be causing the delay. And I think especially with it being online now, people might be quite quick to jump to tab as the reason that we're delayed now. And it could be anything from someone losing their internet and OrgCom to, well, quite literally anything else, but it doesn't automatically mean that tab is to blame if there's a delay. And the same goes for in-person competitions. I think there's just a lot of people are very quick to jump to the conclusion that if there's a delay, it's something to do with tab and not any other factor in the competition.
Awesome. That's really helpful, I think, as well. So thank you all for that. I might just do a quick final whip around. Is there kind of any final thoughts you'd like to impart upon our viewers today. Kelsey, is there anything that you want people to take away from this?
Biggest thing I'd say is just have a go. Tabbing seems a lot scarier when you're just looking at Tabby Cat or something. But as soon as you start going through it, you realize how it just like literally directs you on what to do. And it's just not as scary as people think it is. Would be the biggest thing I'd say, is to just have a go. It's pretty fun, actually.
Yep, awesome. Peter, what about you? What's your wrap up?
I think the biggest thing to take is that we want more people in tab. Tabbers want more people in tab. So don't be afraid to reach out. And like Kelsey said, give it a go. The more people in there, the better. And it's not too hard once you get your head around it.
Awesome. Alice, what about you?
Yeah, definitely. Like, it is quite fun to do. It might not necessarily sound like it's the most enjoyable thing at times, but once you kind of get over the barrier of thinking that it's something elite and godlike and secret powers that like we all magically have, and realize, oh, this is actually something that like can be relatively quickly learned and easy to get, it's kind of takes away that kind of element of like, oh, I couldn't do this personally thing to it. But definitely like give it a go, try it once, twice, work out if it's something you want to do or not, and just have fun with it. And don't be afraid to reach out, because we need more people tabbing, please. We really do.
Yeah, awesome. And finally, Marthe, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. Just try it out and see where you end up. I mean, I would have never expected to be part of a Euros at some point. I never expected to have tapped so many tournaments by now. And also tap so internationally as I'm doing right now. It's really great being involved with so many different people. Yeah, just try it out, see where you end up.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for your time. It's been really useful and hopefully informative for anyone considering doing this. I might just quickly check, does anyone in the audience have any questions for our panel? Feel free to just unmute yourselves, or you can type a question in the chat. I'll give it a minute or two just in case anyone's pondering. But yeah, please do just unmute if you have a question. I also recognize a few people came in a little bit later. So if there's anything you've missed that you want an answer to, just shout out. Any questions, guys? Don't be shy. I'll give it one more minute, maybe. So the question is, for complete beginners, how would you advise it get started? Is there some sort of crash course, or would it be better to go under a mentor? I think, yeah, part of it has been sort of discussed earlier in the session. So hopefully we can make the recording on available. But does anyone just have a kind of recapped thought on that? Does anyone want to kind of just recap, I guess, what the key things you think were sort of discussed earlier on that point?
Yeah, I can recap it.
Thanks, Kat.
So I think it's different for everyone. So I think all four of us had sort of different stories. For me, I just like, there was no tabbers in my state, so we, to run comps, just did it. Otherwise we were doing it on Excel. For others, I think they messaged to just ask to shadow different tabbers and then just follow them around for a couple of minis and then get the confidence, learn, and then increase. Does anyone else have anything else to add? I think the biggest thing, there's no like crash course, but you can join the Facebook group or message any tabber you know, because we're all debaters, we like to talk. We're up for a good chat. And then I think probably the best way would be to shadow someone. because then you get the confidence and you're able to learn all the tricks and everything. Wouldn't recommend just randomly running a mini and then hoping you figure it out. It's always also tabby. You can do demo sort of things. So they just enter a random, I think it has like Hogwarts houses or something, and there's like 8 teams or something. And it teaches you how to do it on this random demo debate, and it clicks it through and tells you and gives you an explanation, which is always a good way to do it. Does anyone have anything to add on that?
I think you've covered the, oh, sorry, you go.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. Just if you just go on Facebook and go to an event of a tournament, usually a tab person is announced, and just message that tab person and say like, hey, can I shadow you? Can I join you? I want to learn this.
Yeah, awesome. There's a second question, which is why do tournaments not open applications for tabbing teams more often? I guess, does anyone have any thoughts on why that's the case? I mean, and also whether you think it would be useful for that to happen. Yeah, just a general question, I guess.
I might jump in there and say it's usually because tabbing isn't seen as much. Well, there just aren't enough people out there, tabbers, that all comms can't really leave it open. You pretty much got to directly ask someone to tab, because otherwise we'll get the thought that we might actually have a weekend off. But usually we want to be able to help. So if there's just not enough tab people in the area, you'd just expect that you'd ask the general go-to person. Just because there's not an application out there doesn't mean that you can't be part of that team. Like we've discussed a few times, that pretty much every tabber will be happy to have someone shadow them or help them out with the competition. So if you make that first step, that definitely gets your foot in the door.
Does anyone have any other thoughts? I think that's a very good reflection though, Peter.
Yeah, I think what you can add is that most tournaments have that by now. They just, I mean, they're like, oh, it went well last time, so let's just ask the same person again. So that just kind of keeps happening. So then you keep the same people having the same tournaments. And that's also kind of like, oh, we have one tab person, that's enough, right? Okay, we're not gonna open up applications. And usually it is enough to have one person, but sometimes you'd want two.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. I mean, just from my own perspective, I can see that there's a growing trend to have DCA applicants, which has not been a thing as much as is in my experience a somewhat new and growing trend. So maybe that will also translate to kind of more applications for tabbing. But I would sort of agree, like even from a convener perspective, sometimes when I'm trying to think of people to tab, I just go to who I know. That's just the easiest thing. But if I know more people are interested, then certainly people that, you know, conveners always are looking for people to tab. So it's not as if, yeah, people are going to get knocked back when they want to do it, I think, for the vast majority of circumstances. So any final questions for our panel? Okay, well, we're pretty much almost on the hour, so I'm going to stop the recording in a moment, but just wanted to say thank you to our panel so much once again. I think this will be a very useful resource for people who are interested in tabbing. So thank you very much for your time.